Welcome to the Rising Entrepreneurs Podcast, where we feature top founders and entrepreneurs and their journey. Now, let's get started with the show.
Oh, welcome everyone. John Corcoran here. I am the co-host of this show, and we've had great guests on this program before. You can check out the archives to hear some of our previous episodes. And before we get into it, this episode is brought to you by EO San Francisco, which is the local Bay Area chapter of Entrepreneurs Organization, which is a global peer-to-peer network of more than 18,000 influential business owners with about 200 or so chapters across 60 or so countries. And if you're the founder, co-founder, owner, or controlling shareholder of a company that generates over 7 figures a year in revenue and want to connect with other like-minded successful entrepreneurs, EO is for you. And you can learn more about who we are, what we do at eonetwork.org/San Francisco. And you can also come down to a test drive if you are interested in exploring membership. All right, I want to give a shout out to our guest here today. His name is David Goldenberg, and he is the founding partner at VLP Law Group, LLP. He does corporate and startup legal work, and he's a new member of EO San Francisco. We're going to be diving into his story and his background. And David, I love to start by getting to know our guests and knowing a little bit about where they started in terms of their entrepreneurial journey. And one thing that stood out for me with you is you got involved in junior achievement.
Yeah.
Something I hadn't heard of before, or maybe
Right.
I had, and it's in the deep recesses of my brain.
Right.
You said it's kind of like Boy Scouts for entrepreneurs. Tell me about it.
That's what it felt like a little bit. It was a sort of at night class, not really a class, I guess, an organization, a group, that met, largely taught by, I think, parents of some of the kids in my school. And I think it's one of these things where there's chapters and you can start a chapter and make the class for your kids. And it helped kids learn about running a business effectively. And so there were different parents that came in and talked about everything from gross margin, right? Like that is the product's going to cost $10. What should we sell it for? Kind of a thing, to sales and marketing, basic, like, how do I sell something? How do I approach somebody? How do I deal with objections? Some very basic kind of sales topics and profit. And then we did basic P&L. Once people started selling the actual good that we picked, taking that back and showing how that turned into a profit and loss statement.
So this is exactly every 8-year-old's dream, is talking about P&Ls and stuff like that.
Well, I think getting rich is every 8-year-old's dream. Not every, but many 8-year-olds' dreams, right?
Were your parents business owners, entrepreneurs?
My dad was an entrepreneur. He was a serial entrepreneur.
Did he bring you into this, or did
no? It was he was. I would say he wasn't unsupportive, but it wasn't like, oh, David, you've got to go do this. Not at all.
Yeah.
I was how would I say it? I was just a kid who liked to join things, that seemed interesting to me. So I was in a bunch of clubs, and that was one of them.
And so your dad was a serial entrepreneur. What companies did he have?
So he was a pharmacist by training, and he first opened. So he left. He worked at Thrifty or one of the big chain drugstores early on, and then left and bought his own pharmacy with a partner. Bought out that partner. And then developed a unique business model for that business, which was he serviced convalescent hospitals. So imagine, one account would be the entire hospital, and each person in that, home would have the right to select whatever pharmacy they wanted. But if you didn't select a pharmacy, they would deliver all the medications you were taking. And he developed a bunch of systems to make it easier for the hospital to deliver those medications to the people. And then he would go out and sort of sell that system and his whole pharmacy services. So that was the base, from which
the
then
smart
he launched.
Is kind of like a B2B model, or going after a larger account. Very smart idea.
Correct.
Yeah,
that's correct. And he closed the front door. He bought a retail pharmacy, kind of like a Walgreens, with, beer and greeting cards and all that stuff. Closed all that, got rid of all that stuff, and had an institutional only pharmacy from early, a couple of years after he bought it. So from there, he developed a computer system to help manage that whole system, and sold that computer system actually to third parties. As he wasn't a programmer.
Wow.
He hired a programmer, developed the thing. He did a nurse training, like educational tape, like a VHS thing that you could go get at Blockbuster or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
pay, your $39 and get some certifications. So that was a third business that he started. And
Wow.
each one of these would kind of cycle through their own life cycles. I just sort
So
of
he was
watched that as a
kind of
kid.
looked for opportunities
He
where he
did.
could provide a service or a product to a market.
That's right. He looked for
Yeah.
unmet need.
Yeah.
And that's right. And things where he felt, he could build something and sell it.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was a salesman by, I would say that was his core way of thinking about the world, right? Was
What can I
like,
sell?
what can I sell? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, and you end up going from, you grew up in, like me, in the San Fernando Valley. We're both Valley
Yep.
boys, and we will hold off on conducting this entire interview in Valley Girl speak, which
Correct.
we could do, but we will hold off. We'll spare everyone
Totally.
else from that. Gag me with a spoon. And you go off to rural Western Massachusetts,
Yes.
which I actually moved in the middle of fifth grade from Woodland Hills Elementary, where I went to elementary school, moved to kind of suburban Massachusetts. And I can still remember walking into this in the middle of the school year, like the principal taking me down the hall to my classroom, opening the door in the middle of the day, and like, oh, here's the new kid, and everyone looking at me, this California kid.
Yep.
And I just didn't fit in, and how
Right.
rough that was.
Yep.
But you had a similar experience going
Very
to
similar. Yeah.
Amherst.
That's right. Yeah. So I went to Amherst my freshman year, and I chose it, as because it was a smaller school, and I've gone to a prep school for high school, and so I thought like, oh, that kind of high touch environment would be a good fit for me, and I think that part of it was a good fit, but not, I just had so many other things that I wanted out of college that I didn't really, how would I say it, that I didn't appreciate when I made my choice. And so, when I got there, and
Like weather.
the weather actually wasn't the worst thing. I mean, the weather wasn't great by any stretch,
That's saying something if the weather wasn't the worst thing.
That's right. I would have toughed it out for the weather. But that like my high school football team at my prep school probably could have beaten the Amherst football team, right?
Right.
And so like you're going to these and I didn't realize like that was part of what I had subconsciously thought college was. My mom went to UCLA. She was a Bruin. We used to go to the UCLA football games, and I had expected maybe not UCLA, but something, right?
Yeah.
And so all that is like mostly absent my freshman year. It was cliquey. And the East Coast people I found to be, again, no offense, just a different way of
culturally
living
just
life.
very different. Yeah,
very different.
Can be
and
very
much
insular.
more reserved, more insular, exactly. And so that was a shock, and that was the hardest part for me. I came home at Thanksgiving and realized that the average person in Los Angeles, even strangers on the street, were, in my eyes, friendlier than my co-freshmen, at Amherst. And that was kind of, those were the hard decision, that led to the hard decision to transfer.
Yeah. That must have been tough that year, making that decision to kind of basically, you plan for this. And, in retrospect, it's not that big a period of time in our lifetimes, right? It's like 6 months or a year or something, and you make your choice and you go there. But at the time, when you're 18, 19 years old, it feels like a massive, huge. I don't know. Did it feel like a failure to you, or you end up going to Stanford, so you land on your feet? But yes. I mean, did it feel at the time like making that decision to leave? Did it feel like I'm, is it a setback?
No, it was more about, I would say, like the devil, right? So, regardless of whether Amherst was a great fit or not, I knew what it was, and I had made some friends, and I had a, environment there, and I knew, and I would, that whole scariness, like you talked about, being thrown into your class, as a fifth grader, I was going to have to do that all over again, right? With a bunch of new random people, and with no assurance that it would be any better. And, ultimately I decided it couldn't be worse. And so why not? But that was, so it was scary in that way, but I don't think it was I didn't feel like a failure. Yeah. I just felt like it was, it's very similar to when you're in a relationship, and if you're not sure it's right, and everyone will tell you when that I didn't know. And so you're sitting in this uncertainty place. And so that it was a hard decision that way.
Yeah. So you end up transferring to Stanford, of course, a
Yes.
wonderful university. What was the experience like for you there?
It's funny. So by day 3, I knew I'd made the right decision. I
Mm.
mean, literally,
Mm.
like everything that I thought was lacking at Amherst, I fell right into, you know, I tell people literally, this I'm dating myself, but when I was in school, they used to put a paper pad on your door where your like friends down the hall could leave you a message, like,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
uh,
Pre-internet, pre-cell phones. Yeah.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And on that, I'm there early for transfer orientation, which was overlapped with freshman orientation. And someone down the hall like wrote a note like, "Hey, we're going to the movies tonight. Do you want to come with us?" And it was a small thing, but I realized like
Yeah.
that's the openness and friendliness and wanting to meet new people that I had expected, and wasn't getting at Amherst. So like from there on, it was just easy path to, I had a great time. I made great friends. It was a very conducive environment for me.
Yeah.
It was a great experience.
And you ended up going straight through
I
and
did.
going to law school there as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know if you have any classmates that are now world famous, but I wouldn't be surprised because Stanford Law School has graduated some, world leaders, secretaries of state, senators,
Yeah.
things like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Did you, when you got to Stanford Law School, did you feel like, oh my gosh, I can't believe the people that I'm competing with here?
Yes. Game changing. I had not really appreciated. I mean, Stanford is a great school, and again, all of this is 20-year-old or 30-year-old now, probably information. So I have no idea what it's like going through Stanford now. I have some idea. I get the alumni magazine, but in general. But when I was there, the undergrad was good. There was, you could get challenged, you could take courses, you could even like go and talk to professors, about things or whatever. But in general, you're taking these, undergrad classes where you're sort of learning broadly, some stuff about things, but, you're not able to go out and, build a rocket if you're studying aeroastro or something like that. Right. Whereas in the law school, uh, and something I had not appreciated was, how much law school is a trade school. You're learning a practice. You're learning to
Yeah.
do this thing. It's a craft,
Yeah.
and you learn that starting day one. And you're to really like this is the first day of the rest of your life. It was very much that approach. And while the faculty was, very good at Stanford undergrad, it was unbelievable for Stanford graduate school. So, for the law school, I was in a class of 12 people with George Roberts lecturing, and George Roberts is the R in KKR, right? He's talking about how to take over companies.
KKR
right?
is a big, is it private equity? Would you describe
Private
it?
equity slash hedge fund.
Company.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, before that word was really a commonplace term, but they bought R.J. Reynolds. The movie Barbarians at the Gate was written about them. It was like this. When you think of the go-go 80s and like all these, people buying companies and breaking them up or whatever, that was KKR. We had a guy who, through the S&L loan crisis, bought 400 banks and turned them around. Like it's like not like little my securities law professor was the ex-commissioner of the SEC.
Wow.
Like it's just that. So now that's at the faculty level, which was amazing. At the student level, I'm in my securities class, sitting next to this woman who looked, was a little older. So I was as young as you could be. Right. I was like 21 starting law school, and she was maybe 30. And they have this, the law school has, again, there are these funny traditions, but wherever you sit on the first day, that's where you sit the whole semester. Right. And I turned to her and I said, "Oh, so what did you do before law school?" And she said, "Oh, I worked at the Fed for 9 years." Right. And we're going to be sitting there like learning how to, what a bond is and like how securities work and whatever. And, she to say she had a head start would be like an understatement of the year. Right. So and we're on the same curve. Right. So that's right. Like, it was a totally different environment.
You go off and you graduate and you join Morrison and Forrester, aka MoFo, which is a kind of a real well-known, well-respected Bay Area firm. You do that for looks like 6 or 7 years or something like that. And before you go off and start your own firm, but where was your head at after you had left, finishing working at that firm? What was your plan after you left?
Leaving MoFo?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I had, as you mentioned, gone straight through, right? So I went straight from undergrad to law school, straight from law school to the big firm. The big firm is, all the grind that, you
Yep.
think it's going to be. It's as bad as, at least it was for me, as everyone, and I don't mean bad in a negative way. I mean, bad is hard, right? So I needed a break. I wasn't like at crisis burnout, but I was definitely at like, I hadn't picked my head up in, what was 10 years, and which were, from like 18 to 30,
Yeah. Formative
right? I
years
mean,
of
it's
your life.
very,
Yeah.
very
Yeah.
like, so I was a very different person, and wanted to take some time to figure things out and explore and, what was my next path. And I was pretty sure, grinding it straight up the ladder at the big firm was not my path.
Mhm.
So I didn't feel any, um, uh, how would I say it? I didn't like, there was no FOMO of like, oh, I could make partner here. That was like not at all that wasn't something I even wanted. So I didn't know what I wanted, but that was where my head was at.
Yeah.
Um,
And so you end up actually getting drawn into working at a startup,
that's right.
Mediabolic at the time.
Yeah,
You do that for about 4 years. Now, this is an interesting time because this is post.com bubble. You
correct.
leave the law firm and what did your family and friends say to you when you leave a stable job at a law firm
Yeah,
after the .com, when lawyers are getting laid off and things like that? What
yeah.
did they say to you about that?
So my dad was very supportive, and in fact, his entrepreneurial head and was supportive of that journey, for me. Uh, and the people in the um some people were jealous.
Other
Peter Thiel
attorneys?
famous. Yeah, exactly.
Uh-huh.
Peter
Uh-huh.
Thiel who did the same thing. He left a lot earlier than me. I think he made it 1 year at the big firm, but he
Uh-huh.
talks about leaving the firm, and they said like, I can't believe you made it out. And he just like shook his head. He's like, the door's right there. Like you can leave
Yeah.
too. Right.
Was he at
So,
Mofo
but
also?
no, he was in
Okay.
one of the big New York
Yeah.
firms,
He
Skadden
went
Cravath or
famously
something
went
like
to
that.
Stanford. Famously went to
Also,
Stanford.
yes, he
Yeah.
was there just,
Yeah.
I think the whole PayPal mafia were 1 or 2 years ahead of me. So Keith Raboy was literally in the
Mm,
one class ahead. He was at Stanford Law School 1 year ahead of me.
mm,
He, was anyways, so I kind of saw that whole world
yeah.
from, right in the front row seat.
Yeah, so
But
because you graduated from law school, you graduated from law school in '96, so it's before
correct.
the whole run up. So from '96 to 2002, you're at Mofo. Are you serving
Yeah,
a lot of startups during that time period?
correct.
Okay,
At IPOs and
so you know these companies. You're seeing the crazy amounts of wealth that are being generated.
yes.
And is that sparking some kind of latent entrepreneurial excitement inside of you, or are you feeling
Well,
like you're
I'd say,
missing out
yeah.
because you're just billing hours?
Right. So I was maybe 2 years too junior
Mm,
to really hit the middle of that stride. So, but I was seeing that, right?
yeah,
So, in 2000, it felt like, 50-50 chance you would be a millionaire,
yeah.
right? In the fifth years, so I was a third year in 99, 2000, which is 3 years of experience as a lawyer. And the fifth years, we're getting offers for general counsel. And your average offer for general counsel would be like 1% equity vesting over 4 years,
Mm,
right? And so if the company's worth, $100 million, which was
yeah,
a typical number back then for an IPO
yeah,
valuation, that's not a bad gig,
yeah.
right?
If you pick the right
Um,
horse.
if you pick the
Yeah,
right horse. And but
yeah,
that's very much right.
right.
And so I was, as a third year, getting offers for like director level.
Hmm.
So which was more like 50,000 shares. It's
Hmm.
kind of like, a sort of nominal equity. And on the other hand, the law firms were raising our salaries as associates quite dramatically to try to keep us from leaving, going to these startups. And so, I made the decision through the .com boom of like, I'm going to keep my law salary and invest in our clients. And so I would write a $10,000 check into the client, the company. I thought like I get to diversify, and I'm probably not going to hit the home run, but this is a good way to kind of get in on some of that action without overly, taking too much point risk, right? Single source of your life wealth and all that risk.
And
And a lot of people,
how did that
what?
play out for you? Did you have any home runs or
No home
no?
runs then. And, like the
Or
VCs. So,
pets.com and web vans then?
yeah, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. A lot, our firm in general, like got their act together to start investing, like literally in 2000, right? Like, so we
Yeah.
just, it's just,
I mean, lawyers and big firms in particular tend to be behind the curve in terms
that's
of
right.
adopting new technology and
That's
new
right.
innovations and things
Yeah.
like that. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Um,
anyway, so yeah, so no, I didn't hit any home runs there. And the offer from my friend was really like to work with my friend on a much more flexible schedule way, at something that seemed interesting.
yeah.
And so that let me, I thought, like, I started halftime, which was it was kind of, I joke to people, it was like this Godfather type offer. I tried to get out and I got pulled
Yeah.
back in,
Yeah.
and because, oh, it's only 20 hours a week. I was like, oh, after working 80-hour weeks, I was like, I could do that standing on my head.
Yeah.
And I did, and it was great. And my mortgage was covered. It wasn't a lot of money, but it was enough to make sure,
Yeah.
I knew, like, I felt secure. And then I had a ton of free time to kind of explore. That eventually, that business was growing. And so I increased my hours and I ended up becoming GC there. So, and then we sold that company,
Okay.
but 3 years later. Yeah.
And then after that, you eventually morph into your current firm, but it
Right.
took a couple of incarnations.
That's right.
You had a couple of different versions of it before it. So tell me about that. Were you planning on
Sure.
starting a firm at that point after you leave
No.
Mediabolic?
Yeah. So my friend from law school, she had been the VP of business development at Mediabolic at the same,
Mhm.
so that honestly, she recruited me so that she could stop doing the legal, because she was getting, as a
She
lawyer,
wanted to
getting
focus
dragged in
on
to
the
do
media, the biz dev.
exactly
Okay. Okay.
on the biz dev. And she also said, I need a bad cop, when we're in these negotiations, right? Like I have
Mm-hmm.
to be the good guy
Yeah.
salesperson, whatever. So, which was great. And there was high trust because we had been to school together, that, uh, anyway, that, and she was a very easy client, right? From
Mm-hmm.
that perspective. So we did a bunch of deals together. And then, that company got sold to what at the time was called Macrovision, is now called Rovi. They're like a DVD content management. They used to be DVDs, but, essentially they
Yeah.
did all the copy protection, kind of stuff. And they certainly weren't going to need, her to be business development. So like literally the day we signed the term sheet to sell the company, um, I think the next day she came to me and said, "What are you doing next?" And I was like, closing my deal, right? Like, I'm going to go sell this company, right? It's like
Yeah.
kind of the biggest deal that I've been working on, like that I'll be working on for like my whole time as GC.
Yeah.
And she's like, why don't we start a firm?
Mm.
And so that's kind of was the genesis of that. And so we started, she had been poking around and saw that, um, as opposed to just hanging out like David Goldenberg, attorney at law, if you had a couple of people and made a website and and put a little brand around it, you could command higher rates.
Yeah.
And so that's what we did.
So this was 2007 timeframe, I believe.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, which
Yeah.
I graduated from law school in 2007. Not
Yep.
the best time for the legal
Terrible.
profession.
Terrible.
Really,
I
really
really
rough
feel
time.
fortunate for where I came out. The
Yeah.
same, even the kids who came out in '01 was the same problem. I had, by that time, I had 3 or 4 years under my belt.
Yeah,
And so
horrible
it was
time in
very,
'01.
yeah,
Yeah.
right.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
I was very valuable as a fourth year,
Yeah.
at that time, and survived that downturn, and even worse in '07, '08.
Yeah.
But by then I was, as I mentioned, so we started our little firm as sort of top-notch half-price lawyers. And
Mm.
so as the recession hit, um, people were looking to cut legal, and we were a good answer for that.
And
So,
you actually made the decision, is it with this firm, to have it be no offices?
well, we started. So it started as, the two of us, then quickly turned into the three of us working from home. Right.
Okay.
Yes, that was a virtual firm,
Yeah.
and we met at, my friend and partner Andrea's, kitchen table once a
Okay.
month. That was our partner meeting. Right.
Yeah.
And so, and the rest of the time we just worked at home, and but we figured out how to,
Yeah.
do remote billing and, deal with the software and, where do we store documents and, some of those kind of things, none of which were really created for lawyers, with security or any of that. So we
Yeah.
kind of had to figure some of that out. And then, yes, what we saw was that it worked. And, kind of one of the founding principles of our firm was, even when I was at Mofo, if the partner wasn't within 2 offices of my office, he or she was calling or emailing, right? That even when you're in the same space, by and large, and when I'm talking to clients, 98% of my communications were on the phone or email. The times that I actually had face-to-face meetings, you have a kickoff meeting for an IPO, and then that's the last time you're all in one room together, right?
Right.
And so a lot of these deals work that way, and so for our practice, and it's not for every practice, but for the practice I ran, we didn't really need the office, and it was a huge cost burden. You have to sign these 5 or 10-year leases in Class A space with mandatory takes and all this stuff, and if you can't maintain that revenue line, it quickly spirals downward because no one wants to be left holding the bag and that lease, right? So if you see the writing on the wall, you switch firms. Right. And then that creates this death spiral, at the law firm level, which is exactly what happened to a couple of big firms around 2000.
Right. They had these big leases. They lose a bunch of attorneys, and then it just goes downhill from there.
So both Brobeck and Heller both crashed that way. Yeah.
Yeah. It happened. I remember that during the Bay Area, during that time period. But that, the counterpoint to having physical office space is at that period of time is way before the pandemic.
Yeah.
A lot of clients kind of expected you to have an office space and expected to come down and meet you face to face. How did you deal with that? How did you communicate, with them?
Yeah. So 2 pieces. One, resume, right? So, yes, we knew from the beginning that people would look down on a firm without offices. There was a widespread sort of, denigration of that kind of practice. You're absolutely right. That it's not real, if you don't have an office. For me, I will tell you, my clients by and large were startups. And they by and large were intimidated by all that, right? You're talking about, the hoodie, the Mark Zuckerberg hoodie types, right? They didn't want to get dressed up and pay for parking and go downtown and meet their lawyer on the 36th floor of some big office building, right?
Yeah.
And so I met them. I'm in Potrero Hill. I would meet them at the coffee shop around the corner.
Yeah.
And again, I generally met my clients once for the pitch, and that was again typically the last time I saw them face to face. And half my clients I never even did that, right? So, but I knew that going in. Because I had practiced for so long, I knew no one really wanted to see me, and if they did, I'm available. It's just, I'm not now. If I'm at Mofo, we represented Clorox, right? If I'm Clorox, buying some other company for $500 million, you need that office on the 36th floor to have that big powwow meeting,
right?
And that practice demands, that space and that kind of overhead. That wasn't my practice,
right. I feel similar to you in the sense that, I started working remotely, however you call it, virtual offices, probably around this time period after I graduated from law school, 2007, 2008, and started using, these digital tools. But it wasn't until the pandemic that these things kind of became widespread.
That's right.
For you, when the pandemic hit and people finally caught up to the benefits of remote work, how did it feel for you? Did it feel like, oh, good, finally, now it's accepted and we're a little bit out of hiding? Or did it feel like, a
couple of thoughts on that? Yeah, it was funny. So one, so I've been work from home for north of 10 years by then, right? Or maybe 10, probably north of 10 years, right? I literally, it felt a little bit like that movie where the nuclear bomb goes off and you slept through it. And I woke up, I went outside for lunch, and all of a sudden there's no one outside.
Yeah.
What happened? Where'd everybody go? Right. So that was this weird feeling. Of course, I knew, we were all in quarantine and whatever. Right. But in San Francisco, people were particularly conscientious, and, it was very quiet, here for a long time. So that was one, kind of a weird thing. Yeah. Our firm did not, a lot of firms, again, it's kind of hard to remember back, but there was this, great disruption for those first 3-6 months, right? How are we going to do business? Is the market crash? There was 20% unemployment, all this kind of crazy, stuff going on in the markets. And we literally did not skip a beat. There was not one thing that changed about our firm. And now I would say the big difference is all my pitch calls are Zooms instead of calls.
Mm.
right? Like, I never go to the coffee shop anymore.
Yeah.
But I do a lot of Zooms. And so I do actually see my clients a lot more, even just for, run of the mill calls, I'll do Zooms. Because again, the ability to connect is just so much better on the video.
Right.
So I'd say that the biggest change, honestly, which wasn't even a big one, was like I do a lot more video now. But that's
Yeah.
otherwise our practice didn't change. Yes, people accept our firm, but we had already again been in business. If we launched in 08-ish, so it was, more than 10 years we had been around at
Yeah.
that point. So it wasn't like, oh, this is a new thing.
So yeah, I mentioned earlier that you kind of reformulated the firm a couple of different times,
Yes.
and I guess shortly after you started it, you decided to reformulate it with a couple of different attorneys.
Yep.
And you found this guy, his name was Craig, who had been kind of a legend in the legal world in the Bay
Yes.
Area. He had scaled up other firms, and you
Yep.
brought him in to help build up and scale up your firm. And you actually
Exactly.
went from 0 attorneys or a couple of attorneys, 2 or 3 attorneys, to 40 attorneys within 12 months. So tell us about
Correct.
that phase of growth.
Yeah. So the guy's name is Craig Johnson. He was an icon in Silicon Valley, serial entrepreneur himself. He was the number 2 lawyer at Wilson Sonsini, if you've heard of that firm.
Yeah, Wilson Sonsini is one of the major iconic firms that represented a lot of the startup companies. Yeah, in the Silicon Valley.
And he was literally the number 2 there. They offered to put his name on the door when he decided to leave in 90. This was like 96. And he started a firm called VLP Law Group. And he joked, he's like, I'm not even putting my name on the door of my own firm. If you think that's going to get me to stay, like you or do not understand who I am, right? And at that time, he was a tech geek on his own. He started the first law firm with the client server architecture. That's how slow lawyers were to adopt technology. But 93, 94, whatever it was when VLG started, was like a PC based, with a server and a PC client, instead of like a dummy terminal, which is what a lot of firms had. And so he built that up to 100 attorneys, this firm VLP Law Group, and then merged it into Heller in 2001, when the sort of venture market crashed. And from there he went into retirement, and we reconnected with him, looking to help us figure out how to grow a firm effectively. And he liked what we were doing, and he saw that in that 2001 to 2008 timeframe, really the technology had progressed where you could be remote, right? That there was the internet speeds were faster, and remote store, Dropbox and all those things had been created. So a lot of these problems had started to get solved, that were big obstacles for doing it back before. And so he decided that would be a good project for him to kind of build a firm with solving some of the problems that he always felt like he had never really been able to solve at his old firm. The main one being work-life balance. That was really his main goal, was by cutting out a lot of these expenses that lawyers would be able to make a comfortable living working a lot less hard.
And so that's what he got him excited about working with you guys.
That's right.
That model. Yeah.
That model, right. And he wanted to give back to the profession, to be quite honest, a firm that would allow people to practice sustainably.
Yeah.
Not get burnt out, right?
So
all that kind of stuff.
You go from 0 or a couple of attorneys to 40 attorneys within 12 months. And then all of a sudden Craig dies.
And then he dies. Yeah.
Oh,
that's right. 18 months in. Yep. And so there was certainly a leadership crisis, which we sort of gap filled very quickly, and then kind of muddled through that first year, and then figured out some good management structures. And essentially, what happened was, one of my partners put it very succinctly. He said, when you join a law firm, you want to be with people who are, quote, like you. And we had, and Craig, everyone liked Craig, but they may not have liked each other so much, right? And so we had at that time, we had a lot of attorneys who were practicing 2, 3, 4 hours a week, and then other attorneys who were full time, and that didn't mesh very well. So a lot of the people with smaller practices left and went back to a solo practice or something else. and we ended up with this sort of core group. So we shrunk back down to from that. I think we were 48 or something when he passed. We shrunk to like mid 20s,
Hmm.
but it was 75% of the revenue. So it wasn't like it was still a much a more sustainable
Mm.
practice. And then we grew back up from there, back up to the sort of 50s that we are now.
And you had to step in a couple of different times into
That's right.
leadership. Yeah.
That's
What was
right.
that
Yeah.
like for you stepping back in, trying to figure out who should stay, who should go, put new governance structure in place?
Super interesting. And to be quite honest, it was great for me. I had never made partner at the big firm where I was at, so I really did not understand how firms were run.
Mm.
As the de facto leader and actually de jure leader, I became the CEO of that firm. I think managing partner was the term we used at the time. I don't remember or whatever, but whatever it was, like I was running that firm, and I got to go. I had lunch with my old like the guy who ran Mofo, right?
Hmm.
I was like talking to which is a 1,000 attorney law firm, right? Like, how do
Right.
you deal with when partners leave?
Yeah.
Which is a problem that all firms have, right?
Yeah.
And we kind of, and I knew a bunch of the people there, so he could actually use real names of like real partners that left and what were the
Mm.
issues and how did he try to deal with it, and
Mm.
and so I talked to 3 or 4 managing partners. I was great counsel. We had an internal general counsel, a guy who counsels at the law firms, and
Mm.
he was front row seat to the Heller collapse. So
Mm.
he saw how like firms go down and what can lead to the total collapse. And he gave some very sage advice. We had so I talked to a bunch of we had crisis management, PR firms, all kinds of things. So I learned a bunch of new skills. To be quite honest, it was a great experience.
Yeah. And now today,
Mm,
with VLP Law Group,
yeah,
you are actually running a practice within this larger firm that you were
yeah,
one of the founders of. It's kind of an interesting
that's right.
evolution for you because you're
Yeah,
running a smaller practice within it, but
yeah,
you were there in the beginning. So what's that
yeah.
like for you
It's
in
a
this
little weird.
phase?
I'll
Yeah.
be honest. It
Yeah.
is a little weird. Seeing your, it's I guess it's a little bit akin to, my son is just off to college, but like seeing him get married and start his own family, it's kind of like that, right?
Yeah.
Where it's fully on its own. There's other
Yeah.
people who are, and running a law firm of like-minded people is not rocket science. That's the nice part, right?
Yeah.
So you just a lot of it is blocking and tackling. And so it's
Mm.
just the people who want to put in that time to do that extra work to make sure, we pick the right healthcare plan or,
Yeah.
whatever it is. There's just a million decisions like that running a business that uh, you don't have to be a genius to do.
Yeah.
Now, is the firm growing, by 40 attorneys a year like it did when Craig was there? No, it's
Yeah.
not. We haven't found that kind of dynamic leader. Really what we have is more management than
Yeah.
leadership. But that's, again, a choice that the partners wanted by the way our firm is structured. So most people wanted exactly what I have, which is I want to run my practice and not have to worry about the firm structure,
Yeah.
right? And not have to worry. Like there's advantages to growing, but there's disadvantages, right? You bolt on, we're 50 attorneys. If we bolted on a practice of 20 as an example, I would change the firm.
Yeah.
That like if that's 30 or
Yeah.
40% of the firm's revenue, those people are going to want to say in how things are run. That may be a different city that they're based in or, way they practice or whatever. And then you've got to adjust. And so no one wants that, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
We're,
yeah,
we're almost out of time, but we're recording this near the end of 2024. And
yeah,
if you look at the startup world, Silicon Valley, San
mm,
Francisco, AI is a hot topic right now. There's a lot of
sure.
disruption that's happening. It's a presidential election year, and that tends to inhibit the economy, inhibit businesses. But what are your observations about the startup economy today? Are you excited about it? Do you see potential? What's the market like from your seat?
It is so, I'm a firm believer in the phrase everything cycles, right? And we had a historic bull cycle in tech, right? I would say honestly, from '08, Facebook IPO to 2021, it was almost, like just
Yeah,
constant march
13
with,
years. Yeah,
yes,
yeah,
of just, every time it looked like it might sputter, it didn't. The certainly the IPO market closed and opened. But by and large, there was always that new hit, right? Whether it was Uber or Airbnb or it's just there was just Asana and whatever, like all these different companies and big companies getting created, right?
Yeah.
And so I would say the good and the bad of AI is how broadly applicable it is, right? So when when Uber launched, right, it certainly created a new class. And for 2 years, all I heard of from my new clients, companies, I'm going to be the Uber for X,
blank,
right?
yes. Yeah.
Right. I mean,
kind of
we all
became a
heard
joke
that.
for a while. Yeah.
That's right. That's right. And the same thing happened with the social networks, right? That, everyone was starting, I'm going to be the Facebook of Latin America or whatever, right? The Facebook, but for, music aficionados or whatever it was, right? And so the good and the bad of AI is that, Google is and Facebook and, all these companies are fighting it's not like this little niche thing that's growing up. It is starting at the top with all that investment at the top, and it feels impossible. Unlike where you have like 1,000 little companies trying to kind of carve their niche out, it doesn't feel like that this time. There's certainly a lot of money on the sidelines. So I'm not seeing that sort of broad uplift at the small end, at the entrepreneur end, that I have in other cycles. Now, will something break that? Probably. That's usually what happens, right? Usually the small, nimble company, outmaneuvers, finds a niche, cracks the system and grows from there. I just haven't seen that yet.
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective. David, this has been fascinating. Thank you for your time. Where can people go to learn more about you, connect with you, learn more about VLP Law Group?
Our website probably is the easiest, vlplawgroup.com.
Awesome. David, thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thanks, John.
Thanks for listening to the Rising Entrepreneurs Podcast. This episode is powered by Rise 25. Please subscribe and check out future episodes.